Hello again. It's a very strange thing, but whatever subject I deal with in these videos, whether it's the Battle of Waterloo or the state of British National Health Service, somebody is sure to try and bring the Jews into it. Usually, more specifically, the Rothschild family. This really is a bit weird, for although they were once pretty important players in the game of international intrigue, their influence and power has declined quite a bit since the 19th century. But there, although some conspiracy theorists try to be up to date and modern by fretting about visitors from outer space or the British royal family being shape-shifting lizards from the planet Zog or something, there are still those who prefer to look backwards, worry about the supposed grasp which the Rothschilds have on their government. The Rothschilds were bankers and businessmen in the 19th century whose origins lay in the German city of Frankfurt. Weird and implausible stories about them began to circulate almost 200 years ago with the publication in 1846 of a pamphlet signed by somebody calling himself Satan, of all improbable things. This was a ridiculous account of Nathan Rothschild, who had started the British branch of the bank owned by the family. And the claim was that he'd been a spectator at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. He allegedly hung around just long enough to be sure that it was a British victory, and he was then carried the news across Belgium on a succession of fast horses to the coast. The idea was that Nathan Rothschild was determined to reach London before the news of the outcome of the battle had got there, so that he could make a killing on the stock exchange. There was a terrible storm raging in the Channel. He had to pay a fortune to a fisherman who was the only man who dared to set sail on such foul weather. Rothschild duly reached London, well ahead of anybody else, and he made 20 million francs as a result of his speculations based on his inside knowledge. I mean, this has all the elements of a good fairy tale. I love the idea of this raging storm and Rothschild shrieking in fury because he can't get to England. It's there's a sort of myth element here involving the devil and the elements and all the rest of it. I can see why it's caught the imagination. Mind it, the whole thing is a whole terrible load of nonsense. Nathan Rothschild wasn't even in Belgium at the time. There was no storm in the Channel that day either. It was just another bit of anti-Semitic propaganda. Nevertheless, the idea that the Rothschilds did well out of wars managed to get quite a grip on people during the second half of the 19th century. This leads to a curious modern link with anti-Semitism and the Rothschilds in particular. Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the British Labour Party, was dogged by accusations that he allowed anti-Semitism to flourish in the party. In 2011, Corbyn wrote a fulsome and glowing introduction to a new edition of a book called Imperialism, which had first been published in 1902 in the wake of the Boer War. It was written by economist John Hobson, and the famous book expounds the theory that the great wars only take place when it's in the interest of the Jews that they do so. Hobson talks of international financiers, chiefly German in origin and Jewish in race, in a unique position to control the policy of nations. This is all clear enough, but he goes on to mention the Rothschilds by name, asking rhetorically if anybody thinks that a major war could take place unless the House of Rothschild wanted it to. These ideas follow on directly from those of the pamphlet about the Rothschilds, which was published in 1846, and perpetuate the notion of war as a Jewish money-making racket. Hobson was thinking of the Boer War, of course, which had just finished, hinting that the Rothschilds had precipitated it to get their hands on all the diamonds and gold in South Africa. This is what I would describe as an unnecessary hypothesis. Of course, the Boer War was all about gold, but this had nothing to do with the Jews. It took place at a time when the British were charging around Africa and stealing anything which wasn't red hot or nailed down. They were greedier and more rapacious than any German Jews could ever have been. Of course, wars lose people money, as well as making fortunes for them. Peace is generally a lot more prosperous for investors and bankers, rather than the turbulence and uncertainty of war, which is a bit too much of a gamble most of the time. Because of this, in the 20th century, a new myth evolved to implicate the Jews in all the troubles of the world. In the early years of the 20th century, in Russia to begin with, and then it was published in this country after the end of the Great War, the book emerged called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was supposed to be evidence of a general Jewish conspiracy to rule the world. The legend lives on, though, that the Rothschilds, and by extension the Jews generally, are behind much of the mischief in the world. I've noticed this very strongly in the last few weeks with some of the comments here. A lot of crank conspiracy theories that are still doing the rounds. I'm thinking now the New World Order feature the Rothschilds as key players, and they're supposed by some to be in ultimate control of the world's money supply. It's a matter of surprise to me that these ancient anti-Semitic ideas are still going strong. But there it is, it's now 2020 and we're still seeing both the Rothschilds and the parallel crackpot idea of Judeo-Bolshevism being aired. I would describe this personally as a monument to human stupidity.